Hello, my dear ones. I'm Margaret, and at 73 years old, I never thought I'd be telling this story. But sometimes, life has a way of teaching us lessons we never expected. And today, I want to share mine with you. The words still echo in my mind like a bell that won't stop ringing. You're nothing but a burden, Mom. Stop pretending we're some happy family. My son Daniel spoke those words to me on Mother's Day, standing in my own living room while his wife Sarah smirked behind him like she'd won some twisted game. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about how sometimes the universe has its own way of balancing the scales. I raised Daniel as a single mother after his father walked out when he was just 3 years old. Those were the hardest years of my life, working double shifts at the diner, coming home with aching feet and grease-stained uniforms, only to find my little boy waiting for me with his arms stretched wide. "Mama's home," he'd squeal, and every sacrifice felt worth it. I scrimped and saved, wearing the same winter coat for 15 years, patching holes in my shoes with duct tape, all so Daniel could have what other children had. Piano lessons, summer camp, new school clothes every September. When he wanted to go to college, I took out a second mortgage on the house my parents left me, the only thing of value I owned. Daniel graduated with honors, became a successful accountant, married Sarah, and moved into a beautiful suburban home. They gave me 2 precious grandbabies, Emma and Jake, who became the light of my life. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I lived alone in my small house, the same one where Daniel grew up, where I'd painted his bedroom blue and hung glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The mortgage was finally paid off, thanks to the inheritance from my sister Helen, who passed away 2 years ago. Helen had been the successful one in our family, never married, built a small fortune through smart investments. She left everything to me, her house, her savings, even her vintage jewelry collection. I should have been comfortable in my golden years, but I chose to keep living simply. The money sat in the bank, while I continued shopping at thrift stores and clipping coupons, because old habits die hard. More importantly, I wanted to save it all for Daniel and the grandchildren. Every Sunday, I'd cook a big dinner and wait for them to visit. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. When they did come, Sarah would make little comments about my outdated furniture or suggest I should modernize the place. Daniel would just nod along, no longer the boy who used to defend me against playground bullies. I noticed the changes slowly, the way you notice autumn creeping in. Phone calls became shorter, visits became less frequent. When I'd call to talk to the grandchildren, Sarah would say they were too busy or at friends' houses. I started to feel like I was imposing on my own family. But I told myself it was normal. Young families are busy. They have their own lives. I convinced myself that blood runs deeper than inconvenience, that the love we shared would always bring us back together. How wrong I was. The end began on a Tuesday in April. I was planting tomatoes in my garden when Daniel called. His voice was stiff, formal, like he was talking to a telemarketer. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over this weekend?" My heart fluttered with hope. "Of course, honey. Should I bring anything? You know how Emma loves my chocolate chip cookies." "No, Mom. Just come. Saturday afternoon." The line went dead, and I stared at my dirt-covered hands, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. Saturday came, and I dressed carefully in my nicest blouse, the blue one Daniel had given me 3 Christmases ago. I brought the cookies anyway, because that's what mothers do. We hope, we nurture, we keep trying, even when the signs are pointing toward heartbreak. Sarah answered the door, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Margaret, come in." Not Mom anymore, just Margaret, like I was a stranger. The children weren't there. "Where are Emma and Jake?" I asked, looking around the pristine living room that always made me feel like I might break something just by breathing. "They're at my mother's," Sarah said, without elaboration. "Daniel's in his office. He'll be right out." I sat on their expensive white couch, clutching my purse and feeling smaller by the minute. The house smelled like Sarah's fancy candles, vanilla and something artificial that made my nose itch. Everything was perfect, cold, and impersonal. No finger smudges on the coffee table, no toys scattered across the floor. It was beautiful and empty, just like my son had become. Daniel emerged wearing khakis and a polo shirt, looking like he was dressed for golf rather than a family conversation. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he said, settling into the chair across from me like we were conducting a business meeting. "We've been thinking, and we believe it's time for some changes."
"Changes?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah moved to stand behind Daniel's chair, her manicured hand resting on his shoulder like she was claiming territory. "We think it would be best if you moved into assisted living," she said. "There are some lovely facilities in the area." The words hit me like ice water. "I don't understand. I'm perfectly healthy. I take care of myself just fine." "That's not the point," Daniel interrupted, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, stranger's eyes. "You're getting older, Mom. What if something happens? What if you fall and can't get help?" "I have my phone. I have neighbors. Mrs. Patterson next door checks on me every day." "Mrs. Patterson is 85 years old," Sarah scoffed. "What good is she going to do in an emergency?" I felt my heart pounding, my mouth going dry. "I don't need assisted living. I need my family. I need my grandchildren." "The children are very busy with school and activities. They don't have time for constant visits to Grandma's house." "Constant visits?" The words came out strangled. "I haven't seen them in 3 weeks." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah's grip on his shoulder tightened. "This is exactly what we're talking about, Margaret. You're becoming clingy and demanding. It's not healthy." The room spun around me. "Clingy? For wanting to see my own grandchildren?" "You call every day," Daniel said, and I could hear Sarah's words coming out of his mouth. "You expect us to drop everything whenever you need something. It's becoming too much." I thought of all the times I'd called, maybe 3 times a week, just to hear their voices. I thought of the help I'd asked for, rides to doctor's appointments when my car was in the shop, assistance moving my winter clothes to the attic. Normal things that families do for each other.
Too much, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. Taking care of your mother is too much? We're not abandoning you, Daniel said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. We'll visit you at the facility. It'll be better this way. You'll have activities. People your own age. People my own age who are sick and dying, I said. Daniel, please, I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. This house, it's all I have left. About the house, Sarah interjected smoothly. We think you should sell it. Use the money for your care. It's too big for one person anyway, and the maintenance must be overwhelming. The truth hit me like a physical blow. They didn't want me in assisted living out of love or concern. They wanted my house. They wanted me out of the way so they could get their hands on my property, my inheritance from Helen. I won't do it, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I won't sell my home, and I won't be pushed into some facility like an unwanted piece of furniture. Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the anger beneath her perfectly applied makeup. You're being selfish, Margaret. Think about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, or what's best for you two? Daniel stood up abruptly, his face flushed. That's enough, Mom. We're trying to help you, and you're making it impossible. This is exactly the kind of behavior we're talking about. What behavior? Standing up for myself? Refusing to be discarded? You're being dramatic and manipulative, Sarah said, playing the victim like you always do. The accusation stung because it was so unfair, so calculated. I had never been manipulative. If anything, I'd been too accommodating, too willing to accept scraps of attention from my own son. Daniel said, I think you should leave, not looking at me. We'll give you some time to think about what we've discussed. I stood on shaking legs, my purse falling to the floor. As I bent to retrieve it, I heard Sarah whisper to Daniel, She's proving our point. Look how unstable she is. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief. I kept expecting my phone to ring, expecting Daniel to call and apologize, to say it was all a misunderstanding. But the phone remained silent. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the photographs of happier times. Daniel's first day of school, his graduation, his wedding where he danced with me and whispered, Thank you for everything, Mom. I love you so much. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this cold stranger who saw his mother as nothing more than an inconvenience? Mother's Day was 2 weeks away, and for the first time in 40 years, I dreaded its arrival.
Mother's Day arrived like a funeral I had to attend for my own heart. I woke up at 5 in the morning, the way I always did, but this time there was no excitement bubbling in my chest, no anticipation of hearing little voices yell, Happy Mother's Day, Grandma. No plans for a family brunch or afternoon in the park. Just silence pressing against my eardrums like cotton. The house felt different that morning. Every corner seemed to echo with memories that now felt like lies. The refrigerator hummed its lonely song, and I realized I hadn't bought groceries in days. What was the point? I was cooking for one, eating for one, living for one. I made coffee in the same mug Daniel had given me years ago. World's Best Mom, painted in cheerful yellow letters. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. World's best mom, apparently, until you become inconvenient. The morning stretched ahead of me like a desert. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, but every task reminded me of them. Dusting the piano where I'd helped Emma practice her scales, organizing the closet where I kept Jake's artwork from school. Each memory was a knife twist in my chest. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang, and my heart leaped like a teenager's. Maybe Daniel had come to his senses? Maybe... Margaret, it's Mrs. Patterson from next door. My neighbor's voice was warm with concern, and I realized I was crying before she'd even finished speaking. "Oh, honey," she said gently, "I saw you working in the garden yesterday, and you looked so sad. Are you all right?" Mrs. Patterson was the only person left who still saw me as human. At 85, she was sharper than most people half her age, and she had the kind of intuition that comes from living through 8 decades of joy and heartbreak. "I'm fine," I lied, but my voice cracked on the words. "No, you're not. I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, she sat at my kitchen table, her wrinkled hands wrapped around a cup of tea, listening as I poured out the whole terrible story. I told her about the confrontation, about Daniel's coldness, about Sarah's calculating cruelty. I told her how I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible, even to myself. "That boy doesn't know what he's throwing away," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice fierce with indignation. "I watched you raise him. I saw you walking to work in the rain because your car broke down and you couldn't afford to fix it. I saw you studying at this very table, helping him with homework you barely understood yourself." Her words should have comforted me, but they only made the pain sharper. Because they were true, and truth was the cruelest thing of all. "Maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe I am a burden." Mrs. Patterson's teacup hit the table with a sharp clink. "Margaret Elizabeth Harrison, don't you dare say that. You are not a burden. You are a woman who gave her whole life to ungrateful people who don't deserve your love." After she left, promising to check on me the next day, I sat alone with my thoughts. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen windows, the same light that used to illuminate Daniel's face as he told me about his day at school. Now that light felt cold, foreign, like it was shining in someone else's house. I walked through my home like a ghost, haunting her own life. In Daniel's old bedroom, I touched the sports trophies I'd cheered for, the books I'd read to him countless times. His high school graduation photo smiled down at me from the dresser, the boy who'd promised to always take care of his mom. That night, I called him. My fingers shook as I dialed the number I knew by heart. "Hello?" His voice was distant, distracted. "Daniel, it's Mom. I just wanted—" "Mom, this isn't a good time. We're having dinner guests." "It's Mother's Day," I said quietly. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. In the background, I could hear laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sounds of a celebration I wasn't invited to. "I know what day it is," he said finally. "We'll talk later." The line went dead, and I held the phone to my ear for a long time, listening to the dial tone like it might transform into his voice saying he was sorry, that he loved me, that he was coming over with the children and flowers. But it didn't, and he wasn't.
That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was drowning in my own loneliness. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs, and I wondered if this was how it would end, me fading away in this empty nest, forgotten by the very people I'd built my life around. I thought about Sarah's words. You're becoming clingy and demanding. Was wanting to see your family clingy? Was asking for help demanding? When had love become such an inconvenience? The next morning brought no relief. I went through the motions of living. Shower, dress, breakfast. But everything felt hollow. The food tasted like cardboard. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, an old woman with sad eyes and gray hair who'd somehow taken over my life. Days blended into each other. I stopped answering the phone because the only calls were from telemarketers. I stopped checking my mailbox because it only contained bills and advertisements. The world moved on around me while I stood still, trapped in my own heartbreak. Mrs. Patterson kept her promise, visiting every few days with casseroles and conversation. She was my lifeline, the only person who remembered I existed. But even her kindness couldn't fill the Daniel-shaped hole in my heart. You need to eat more, she scolded gently, noticing how my clothes hung loose on my shrinking frame. Grief isn't supposed to make you disappear, but disappearing felt easier than facing the truth that I'd raised a son who could discard me like an old sweater that no longer fit his lifestyle, that the grandchildren I loved with every fiber of my being were being taught to forget their grandmother existed. 2 weeks after Mother's Day, I was pulling weeds in my garden when a car pulled up to the curb. My heart raced. Maybe it was Daniel. Maybe he'd realized his mistake. But it was Sarah, alone, walking up my front path with the confident stride of someone who owned the world. "Margaret," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to talk." I stood up slowly, dirt under my fingernails, my back aching from bending over the flower beds. "If this is about assisted living, it's about being reasonable," she cut me off. "Daniel is beside himself in worry about you. Mrs. Patterson told her grocery clerk that you're not eating, not taking care of yourself. This is exactly what we were concerned about." The betrayal hit me fresh and sharp. Even my neighbor's concern was being used against me. "I'm fine," I said, but we both knew it was a lie. Sarah's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You're not fine, Margaret. You're proving our point every day. The best thing for everyone, including you, is to make this transition before things get worse."
She handed me a brochure for Sunset Manor, a facility across town. The pictures showed smiling elderly people playing bingo and tending tiny garden plots, but their eyes looked as empty as I felt. "Think about it," Sarah said, already walking back to her car, "for Daniel's sake, if not your own." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the brochure. The assisted living facility looked clean and cheerful, but I could read between the lines. It was expensive enough to drain my savings, to force the sale of my house, to leave nothing for the grandchildren I'd hoped to provide for. This was their plan all along. Isolate me, make me doubt myself, then swoop in to collect the pieces of my life. But as I sat there in my empty house, surrounded by the echoes of better days, something began to stir in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it wasn't despair either. It was the first flicker of anger, and anger, I was beginning to remember, had always made me stronger. The anger started small, like a pilot light in an old furnace, but it grew stronger each day. I found myself remembering things I'd forgotten, or maybe things I'd forced myself to forget. I remembered working 3 jobs when Daniel was in high school because he wanted to play baseball and needed expensive equipment. I remembered selling my mother's wedding ring, the only thing of hers I had left to pay for his senior trip. I remembered the night shifts at the hospital cafeteria, coming home at dawn to make his breakfast before school, my feet screaming in pain from standing for 8 hours straight. I remembered the day he graduated college, how he'd hug me tight and whispered, "I'm going to take care of you now, Mom. You'll never have to worry about anything again." What a fool I'd been to believe him. 3 days after Sarah's visit, I was in my sister Helen's old room, going through papers I'd been avoiding since she passed. Helen had been methodical about everything, keeping detailed records of her investments, her properties, her carefully planned financial empire. As I sorted through folders and bank statements, I began to understand just how much she'd left me. The house I knew about, a beautiful Victorian in the historic district, worth nearly $500,000. But there were other things: stock portfolios, bonds, a small apartment building Helen had owned and rented out. Conservative estimates put the total inheritance at just over $800,000. $800,000 that Daniel and Sarah were so eager to get their hands on. I sat back in Helen's antique chair, surrounded by evidence of my sister's shrewd business sense, and felt something shift inside me. Helen had been fierce, independent, someone who never let anyone take advantage of her. She'd left me this fortune not just as a gift, but as a tool, a weapon if I needed one. And I was beginning to think I did. That evening, I called my sister's lawyer, James Mitchell, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for protecting his clients' interests above all else. "Mrs. Harrison," he said warmly when I introduced myself. "Helen spoke of you often. I was sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I was wondering if I could schedule an appointment to discuss my inheritance. I need to understand my options." "Of course. Are you thinking of making changes to your will? Investments?" "Something like that," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. The next morning, I dressed carefully in Helen's navy blue suit. It fit me perfectly, as if she'd known I'd need armor someday. I drove to Mr. Mitchell's office in town, my hands steady on the wheel, for the first time since this nightmare began. His office was warm and professional, filled with law books and family photos. He offered me tea and settled behind his mahogany desk with genuine concern in his expression. "How can I help you, Mrs. Harrison?" I told him everything about Daniel and Sarah's demands, about the assisted living pressure, about feeling isolated and manipulated. I showed him the brochure Sarah had given me, explained their timeline and expectations. Mr. Mitchell listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Harrison, I have to ask, do you want to move into assisted living?" "Absolutely not. I'm in good health. I'm mentally sharp, and I love my home." "Then you're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not unless that's your choice. Now, let's talk about protecting your assets." For the next hour,
He explained options I'd never considered: trusts that would protect my money from manipulation, legal documents that would ensure my wishes were respected, ways to structure my inheritance that would give me control while protecting the grandchildren I still loved despite everything. Your son has no legal right to force you into care, Mr. Mitchell explained, and he certainly has no claim to your assets while you're living. If he's pressuring you under the assumption that you'll leave everything to him, well, that's his assumption to make. As I left his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope, backed by legal protection and financial power. My next stop was the bank where Helen's accounts had been transferred to my name. The manager, Mrs. Chen, was professional and discreet as she walked me through my options. "You have significant assets here, Mrs. Harrison. Are you thinking of making any major changes?" "I'm thinking of making some investments," I said, "in people who deserve them." That afternoon, I called Mrs. Patterson and asked if she'd like to have dinner with me. Not one of her charity casseroles in my lonely kitchen, but a real dinner out at Romano's, the nice Italian place downtown.
"Are you sure, dear?" she asked. "You've been so—" "I've been feeling sorry for myself," I said, "but I'm done with that now." At dinner, over plates of chicken parmigiana and glasses of wine, I told Mrs. Patterson about my meeting with the lawyer, about my newfound understanding of my financial situation, about the plans beginning to form in my mind. "You know," she said, cutting her pasta thoughtfully, "I've lived next door to you for 15 years, and I've watched you sacrifice everything for that boy. But I also remember the woman you were before all this heartbreak. You were strong, Margaret. You were a fighter." "I'm remembering that," I said. "Good, because that woman, the real you, she deserves better than being discarded like yesterday's newspaper." Over the next week, I threw myself into research and planning with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I contacted Helen's property management company and learned about the apartment building she'd owned. 3 units, all rented to young families, all providing steady income. The manager, Mr. Rodriguez, was honest and reliable, someone Helen had trusted completely. "Your sister was a fair landlord, but a smart businesswoman," he told me during our phone conversation. "She never let anyone take advantage of her, but she helped people when they needed it." I thought about that balance: kindness with boundaries, generosity with wisdom. Helen had found a way to be both compassionate and strong. Maybe it was time I learned that lesson too. I also reached out to my old friend Carol from the diner where I'd worked for so many years. She was retired now, living comfortably with her husband in a senior community that was nothing like the sterile facility Sarah had tried to push on me. These people had chosen their living situation, weren't pressured into it by manipulative family members. "Margaret!" Carol's voice was bright with surprise when I called. "I haven't heard from you in months. How are you doing?" I found myself telling her the truth, not the polite fiction I'd been maintaining, but the real story of what Daniel and Sarah had put me through. Carol listened with growing outrage.
"That ungrateful little weasel," she said, and her bluntness made me laugh for the first time in weeks. "After everything you did for him, honey, you need to show them exactly who they're dealing with." "I'm working on that," I said. "Good. And remember, you're not alone in this. You've got people who care about the real you, not just what they can get from you." As I hung up the phone, I realized Carol was right. I wasn't alone. I had allies, resources, and most importantly, I was beginning to remember who I really was underneath all the hurt and self-doubt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists: assets, options, people I could trust, people I couldn't. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my own life instead of being swept along by other people's agendas. I thought about Helen's fierce independence, about Mrs. Patterson's loyalty, about Carol's blunt honesty. I thought about the woman I'd been before I became so focused on being the perfect, accommodating mother that I'd forgotten to be a person in my own right. Daniel and Sarah thought they were dealing with a lonely, desperate old woman who would do anything to keep scraps of their attention. They thought I was weak, powerless, dependent on their approval for my sense of self-worth. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, I called Daniel's office. His secretary recognized my voice. I'd called so many times over the years, checking on him, making sure he was eating well, asking about work stress. "Is he available?" I asked, my voice calm and pleasant. "I'll see if he's free, Mrs. Harrison." A minute later, Daniel's voice came on the line, cautious and slightly impatient. "Mom, what's going on?" "I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you and Sarah suggested. I think we should meet to discuss it properly." I could hear the surprise in his voice, quickly followed by something that sounded like relief. He thought I was surrendering. That's great, Mom. We could come over this weekend. Actually, I'd prefer to meet somewhere neutral. How about Sunday brunch at the Grandview Hotel? Their dining room is lovely." The Grandview was expensive, elegant, the kind of place Daniel took clients when he wanted to impress them. I could hear him calculating in his head, if I was suggesting an expensive restaurant, I must be serious about cooperating. "Sure," he said. "Should I make reservations for 3? "Make it for 4, I said sweetly. "I'm bringing someone too." After I hung up the phone, I called Mr. Mitchell and asked if he'd be available for Sunday brunch. "I'd like a witness to this conversation," I explained, "someone who understands legal implications." "I'd be happy to join you, Mrs. Harrison. Should I prepare any specific documents?" "Not yet, but I have a feeling we'll need them soon." Sunday morning, I dressed in Helen's best outfit, a designer dress I'd never had occasion to wear, paired with her pearl necklace and matching earrings. I looked in the mirror and saw not a desperate old woman begging for scraps of love, but someone with dignity, power, and options. Someone who was done being anyone's victim.
The Grandview Hotel's dining room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and white linen tablecloths. I arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to claim the psychological advantage of choosing our table. Mr. Mitchell joined me promptly, looking distinguished in his charcoal suit. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Harrison?" he asked as we settled into a corner table with a view of the gardens. "I've been ready for this my whole life," I said. "I just didn't know it until now." Daniel and Sarah arrived exactly on time, their faces carefully composed in expressions of concern and patience. Sarah wore a designer dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, and Daniel looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They both faltered when they saw Mr. Mitchell. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "you didn't mention you were bringing someone. This is James Mitchell, my attorney, Helen's attorney, actually. He's helping me understand my legal options." Sarah's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of alarm in her eyes. "Legal options for what?" "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "We have so much to discuss." The waiter took our orders. Expensive items I chose deliberately, wanting them to see that I wasn't the penny-pinching old woman they thought I was. When he left, Daniel leaned forward with forced concern. "Mom, We're glad you're being responsible about planning for your future. That shows real maturity. Maturity, I repeated, tasting the condescension in the word. Yes, I suppose it is mature to finally see people clearly. Sarah jumped in smoothly. We've been researching Sunset Manor more thoroughly. They have an opening in their assisted living section, and with your inheritance from Helen, you could afford the premium package. Stop, I said quietly. The word hung in the air like a blade. Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting interruption. I know about the inheritance, I continued. All of it. The house, the investments, the rental property, the stock portfolio. I know exactly how much money Helen left me. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. That's good, Mom. It's important to understand your finances when making these kinds of decisions. $800,000, I said, watching their faces carefully. Give or take. Sarah's eyes widened, despite her attempt to look unsurprised. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's substantial, he said, which is exactly why you need professional management, proper care. What I need, I interrupted, is to understand why my son and his wife are so eager to get their hands on my money. The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners continued their conversations around us, but at our table, the air thrummed with tension. We're not after your money, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. We're concerned about your well-being. Are you? I asked. Because Mr. Mitchell has helped me understand something interesting about Sunset Manor. It costs approximately $6,000 per month for their premium care. At that rate, my inheritance would last about 11 years. Coincidentally, that's almost exactly the life expectancy for a woman my age. Daniel's face went pale. Mom, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You want me in expensive care that will drain my assets completely, leaving nothing for my grandchildren when I pass away. Nothing except perhaps my house, which you've suggested I sell to fund this care. Mr. Mitchell spoke for the first time, his voice professionally neutral. Mrs. Harrison has asked me to review the financial implications of the assisted living proposal. The mathematics are quite clear. Sarah's mask finally slipped. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're criminals. Help me? I laughed, and the sound was sharper than I intended. Help me the way you helped me on Mother's Day? The way you've helped me feel welcome in my own family? You're being dramatic, Daniel started. I'm being honest, I cut him off. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest. Do you want to know what dramatic looks like? I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder Mr. Mitchell had prepared. This is dramatic. I slid the papers across the table. Daniel picked them up with shaking hands, Sarah reading over his shoulder.
What is this? Daniel asked, though I could see he was already understanding. It's my new will, I said calmly. As of yesterday, you are no longer my beneficiary. The words hit them like a physical blow. Sarah actually gasped. Instead, I continued, my inheritance will be held in trust for Emma and Jake, to be released when they turn 25. Until then, the assets will be managed by Mr. Mitchell and used for their education and legitimate needs. You can't do this, Sarah whispered. Actually, she can, Mr. Mitchell interjected. Mrs. Harrison is mentally competent and has every right to distribute her assets as she sees fit. Daniel's hands were shaking as he set the papers down. Mom, please, think about what you're doing. We're family. Family, I repeated. Yes,
Let's talk about family. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't manipulate vulnerable people for financial gain. Family doesn't call their mother a burden. I never said, Daniel began. You called me a burden. On Mother's Day, in my own living room. You said I was clingy and demanding for wanting to see my grandchildren. Tears were running down my cheeks now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of finally speaking truths I'd held inside for too long. Do you know what I was doing the day you called me a burden? I was planning Emma's birthday party. I'd already bought her presents, made arrangements with the bakery for her favorite cake. I was going to surprise her with the bicycle she'd been wanting. Sarah started to speak, but I held up my hand.
I'm not finished. I was also researching colleges for when Jake gets older, thinking about how I could help with tuition costs. I was planning your futures while you were planning to dispose of me. The waiter appeared with our food, sensing the tension and quickly retreating. None of us touched our plates. But here's the thing about family, I continued. Real family doesn't give up. Even when they're hurt, even when they're betrayed, they keep loving. I will always love you, Daniel, because you're my son. But I will never again let you mistake my love for weakness. Mom, Daniel's voice cracked. The house is staying in my name until I die, I said. The money is protected in trust for my grandchildren, and I will live independently for as long as I'm able, not because you approve, but because it's my life to live. I stood up, Mr. Mitchell rising with me. There's one more thing. I reached into my purse again and pulled out 2 envelopes. These are for Emma and Jake. Cards for their birthdays with letters explaining why Grandma won't be at their parties anymore. I've included my phone number and address in case they ever want to reach out when they're older. Sarah snatched the envelopes. You're not giving these to my children. You're right, I said calmly. I'm giving them to you. What you do with them is your choice, but someday your children will ask why their grandmother disappeared from their lives. You'll need to decide what story you want to tell them. I placed money on the table to cover the entire bill, including a generous tip. Thank you for brunch. I hope you enjoyed it, because it's the last meal I'll ever buy for either of you.
As I turned to leave, Daniel called out desperately, Mom, wait, we can work this out. I looked back at him, this man who used to be my little boy, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world, and felt something settle in my chest, not hatred, not even anger anymore, just a deep, profound sadness for what we'd lost and what could never be recovered. Some things can't be worked out, Daniel. Some damage can't be undone. You made your choice when you decided I was disposable. Now, I've made mine. Mr. Mitchell and I walked out of that dining room with dignity, leaving behind 2 people who were beginning to understand the true cost of their greed. In the parking lot, Mr. Mitchell turned to me with something like admiration in his eyes. That was masterfully done, Mrs. Harrison. It was necessary, I said. They needed to understand that being old doesn't mean being powerless. What happens now? I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling lighter than I had in months. Now I go home and live my life, really live it, for the first time in years. As I drove away from the hotel, I could see Daniel and Sarah through the restaurant windows, hunched over the table in intense conversation. They were probably trying to figure out how to fix this,
how to manipulate me back into compliance. But they had underestimated me for the last time. I wasn't the desperate, lonely woman they thought they could control. I was Helen's sister, with her strength and her resources. I was Mrs. Patterson's friend, with her loyalty and wisdom. I was the woman who raised a child alone, built a life from nothing, and survived every challenge life had thrown at me. And I was just getting started.
6 months later, I was sitting in my garden, watching the tomatoes ripen in the September sun, when Mrs. Patterson came over with her morning coffee and a knowing smile. "Any word from Daniel?" she asked, settling into the chair I'd placed beside mine for her daily visits, living arrangements. Mrs. Patterson chuckled. "I imagine they have." The truth was, Daniel and Sarah had been trying to reach me for weeks. At first, their messages were angry, threatening to contest the will or have me declared incompetent. Mr. Mitchell had calmly explained to them that they had no legal standing for either action. I was mentally sound, financially stable, and my decisions were entirely lawful. Then the messages became pleading. Daniel's voice cracking as he apologized, begged for forgiveness, claimed they'd made terrible mistakes. Sarah's more calculated attempts at reconciliation, suggesting we could work together to heal the family. But I had learned the difference between genuine remorse and panic over lost money. Their sudden change of heart coincided perfectly with Mr. Mitchell's letter informing them of the trust's final structure and their complete exclusion from my estate. "Are you going to call them back?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "I don't think so," I said. "Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And maybe that's for the best." My new life had taken shape beautifully. I'd hired a wonderful housekeeper, Maria, who came twice a week and treated me like family rather than a burden. Her teenage daughter, Sophia, often joined her, and I'd started helping her with college applications. It felt good to nurture someone who appreciated it. I'd also gotten involved with the community center, teaching basic financial literacy to women who reminded me of my younger self, struggling, overwhelmed, trying to do everything alone. Helen's inheritance allowed me to sponsor scholarships and help families in ways I'd never imagined possible.
The rental property Helen left me was doing well under Mr. Rodriguez's management. I'd met all the tenants, young families just starting out, people working hard to build better lives. Instead of raising rents like they'd expected, I'd actually lowered them slightly and improved the properties. Helen's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "You can be successful and kind, Margaret. They're not mutually exclusive." "You know," Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, "I got a visit from your grandson yesterday." I looked up sharply. "Jake?" "The older one. Emma. She rode her bicycle over, asked if I knew why you didn't come to her birthday party." My chest tightened. "What did you tell her?" The truth, in a way a 10-year-old could understand. That sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and it makes everyone sad. But it doesn't mean anyone stopped loving anyone else. I set down my gardening shears, my hands suddenly shaking. "What did she say?" "She said her parents told her you were sick and couldn't see children anymore. She wanted to know if that was true." Anger flared in my chest, white-hot and pure. Even now they were lying to protect themselves, making me the villain in their children's story. "I told her," Mrs. Patterson continued gently, "that you were perfectly healthy and that you missed her and her brother very much. I gave her one of your tomatoes and told her to tell you hello if she saw you around town." Tears blurred my vision. They're poisoning them against me. Maybe, or maybe children are smarter than we give them credit for. Emma asked me for your address, said she wanted to send you a picture she drew.
That afternoon, I found myself walking to the mailbox with more hope than I'd felt in months. And there it was, a hand-delivered envelope with my name written in careful 10-year-old cursive. Inside was a drawing of two figures in a garden, a tall woman and a small girl, both smiling. At the bottom, in purple crayon, Emma had written, "I miss you, Grandma. Love, Emma. P.S. Mrs. Patterson's tomato was really good." I sat on my front porch and cried. Not tears of sadness this time, but of joy mixed with heartbreak. My granddaughter still loved me. She was brave enough to reach out despite whatever stories her parents had told her. That evening, I called Mr. Mitchell. "I want to set up education accounts for Emma and Jake immediately," I said, "separate from the main trust. I want to make sure they can go to college regardless of what their parents do." "That's very wise," he said, "and very generous." "It's not generous," I corrected him. "It's what grandmothers do." Over the next few weeks, more letters arrived. Jake sent me a soccer trophy he'd won with a note saying his coach asked where his grandma was, and he didn't know what to say. Emma sent me pressed flowers and stories she'd written in school. I responded to each one, carefully crafting age-appropriate letters that expressed my love without putting them in the middle of adult conflicts. I sent small gifts, books, art supplies, things that wouldn't seem excessive to their parents, but would show the children they were remembered and cherished. The phone calls from Daniel and Sarah became less frequent, then stopped altogether. I heard through Mrs. Patterson's network of neighborhood gossips that they were having financial troubles. Daniel's accounting firm was struggling, and they'd overextended themselves on their mortgage and lifestyle. I'd also gotten involved with the community center, teaching basic financial literacy to women who reminded me of my younger self, struggling, overwhelmed, trying to do everything alone. Helen's inheritance allowed me to sponsor scholarships and help families in ways I'd never imagined possible. Part of me, the part that still remembered loving them, felt sorry for their situation. But I'd learned that love didn't mean rescuing people from the consequences of their own choices. One crisp October morning, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My heart clenched as I saw Daniel get out alone, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He walked up my front path slowly, like a man approaching his own sentencing. "Hello, Mom." I leaned on my rake, studying his face. "Daniel, you look good," he said. "Healthy, happy." "I am?" He nodded, glancing around at my well-maintained yard, my freshly painted shutters, the obvious signs of a life being lived fully. "The kids miss you," he said quietly. "I miss them too. Sarah's not handling things well. The money situation, I mean. We both thought. You thought I'd be dead by now, leaving you everything?" The words came out matter-of-fact rather than bitter. He flinched. "We thought you needed taking care of." I did need taking care of, I needed my family to love me, to include me, to treat me like I mattered. Instead, you decided I was disposable. I was wrong. His voice cracked. We were wrong. Completely, horribly wrong. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and something that might have been genuine remorse. Yes, you were wrong. I agreed. Is there any way, any chance we could try again? The kids are asking questions I don't know how to answer.
I thought about Emma's drawings, Jake's letters, the love that still existed between grandchildren and grandmother, despite their parents' best efforts to poison it. The children are welcome here any time, I said carefully. You know where I live. And Sarah and me? I looked at this man who used to be my little boy, who used to promise to take care of me forever, who had broken my heart so thoroughly I'd thought it might never heal. Some things can't be undone, Daniel, but maybe, someday, they can be forgiven. When the forgiveness is real on both sides, not just motivated by financial need. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. As he walked back to his car, I called after him, Daniel? He turned. Tell the children their grandmother loves them. Tell them they'll always have a place here when they're ready. After he left, I finished raking my leaves, then went inside to make myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd cried so many tears, planned so many sacrifices, worried about so many things that ultimately hadn't mattered. Now it was just me, my memories, and a future that belonged entirely to me. Mrs. Patterson was right. I was healthy and happy. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. I had financial security and the means to help others. I had grandchildren who loved me, despite the obstacles their parents had created. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I was alone by choice now, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, living a life that reflected my values rather than other people's expectations. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled.
Margaret? It was Carol, my old friend from the diner. How are you doing, honey? I'm doing wonderful, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. That night, as I prepared for bed in my own home, surrounded by my own things, living by my own choices, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. That broken, desperate person who would have done anything to keep scraps of her son's attention. She was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned that love without respect isn't really love at all, someone who understood that being needed isn't the same as being valued. I'd inherited more than money from Helen. I'd inherited her wisdom, her strength, her refusal to be anyone's victim. And in the end, that inheritance was worth more than all the financial assets in the world. My son had rejected me, calling me a burden, until I inherited everything that mattered: self-respect, true friendship, and the knowledge that I was enough,
all by myself. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from people who don't deserve your love, even when those people are family.